Hello, this is John Lewis. Thank you to Xena and Ideas UK for inviting me to deliver this presentation. We have some feedback. We have some feedback going on here, which we need to. I think that's solved. The field of innovation and strategic innovation is my main field of focus these days. And so I'd like to be giving you an overview of the developing nature of innovation in established organizations as distinct from startups, and the importance of the strategic aspects of innovation. And I'd like to start by introducing the purpose of the presentation and describing my background before going into more detail. I think I might just close my video for now, though, because I don't think you need to see me the whole time, although I might pop up again later during the questions. Now, innovation, and particularly the development of organizational innovation, is at a very interesting phase. And you're probably going through it yourselves. Many people increasingly understand that innovation is essential to the performance and competitive advantage of their organization. And I presume that you're here today because you believe that, or at least suspect that. Consequently, many organizations are operating innovation activities, programs, operations of various kinds. And many of them are making substantial progress, but they're also running into obstacles of various types. Understanding the nature of those obstacles and the possible ways of overcoming them is likely to require a deeper understanding of the nature of innovation and its value than many organizations have yet developed. So my purpose here is to provide people involved in innovation operations in their organization with the wherewithal to develop a better understanding of ways to innovate more effectively, and in particular to overcome and avoid these obstacles. And I'll go into more detail on that later. Now, a bit about me as background. My background is in two parts, really. In the first part, for about 10 years, I was involved in R&D as an applied physicist, research and development, which nowadays would probably be called innovation, and 4 different kinds of R&D. Industrial R&D in the central research laboratories of a large company, product R&D, developing customized products in collaboration with specific customers, academic R&D, developing modeling and numerical simulation techniques in optical diffraction, and contract R&D for a tech consulting company. And during that period, the main thing that I developed was the ability to model things, the development, implementation, explanation, and application of models in a variety of subject areas. In the second part of my background, for about 15 to 20 years, I was a training instructor in IT and information technology in a specific field. We were training software professionals, mainly in large organizations, on the adoption of arguably the biggest innovation in software engineering of the last 30 years, which is object-oriented software. This involved training them on analysis, design, and programming using a mindset which is substantially different from what they'd been doing in the past. So that's my background. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been starting to become interested in innovation management, which I prefer to call organizational innovation, and I've developed an understanding of an approach to helping people in this field. Trying to move on. Excuse me while we figure out why I'm not moving to the next slide. Here we go. Nowadays, innovation is everywhere, in the sense that there are people in a wide range of roles and organizations who are beginning to understand that innovation is important. And you're probably seeing innovation, the word innovation, in product descriptions, annual reports, mission statements, even political speeches contain innovate, innovative, or innovation somewhere along the line. So there's an innovation revolution taking place, which has been growing for many years, and it's not going to go away. For many decades, we had research and development, which I was involved in, but innovation is different in the sense that there's a stronger intention that it's connected to valuable outcomes in the form of different or new products or processes, and it's organized differently. So what is innovation? There are so many descriptions and definitions that will never get everyone to agree. So here's my working definition of innovation: discontinuous improvement. It involves improvement through step changes rather than smooth changes. I could go into more detail, but we'd end up arguing about definitions, so let's not do that. Innovation clearly takes place in a variety of contexts, and in particular in different types of organizations. And I want to make a distinction here between startups and established organizations. Startup ventures have been founded to launch innovative products ever since there have been new products. But it's in established organizations that the current revolution in innovation is happening. Many organizations have initiated activities, projects, programs of various kinds to do with innovation. They're allocating budgets and people's times to pursue innovative opportunities and developments. And some have, and maybe you have appointed innovation project leaders, innovation program managers, chief innovation officers, and so on to lead, manage, coordinate, and administer their innovation activities. So organizational innovation is emerging as an important operational area. Many organizations are having substantial success by whatever measures you choose to use, but there's still a long way to go. And I want to just highlight the obstacles that people are facing in innovation. I don't know whether you follow the surveys of an organization called Innovation Leader in Boston, but back in their survey, which they called, I think they called it their benchmark for 2018, they identified a bunch of obstacles, and this is showing the top 10. I haven't counted whether there are 10 there, but there were top 10. And there was also an article in the Harvard Business Review by Scott Kirsner, who leads Innovation Leader, about these obstacles, and the reference to that article is on the left of this slide. And you can see the kind of things people are facing: politics, turf wars, and lack of alignment, cultural issues. I won't read them from the slide, but you get the idea. There's a wide range of different aspects. Now, one of the difficulties with this is the surveys are sort of self-reported. So some of these might be real problems. Some might be causes of problems. Others might be symptoms of problems. So, you know, they're not necessarily all of the same kind, but this gives you some indication of what is reported by, I believe there were 270 innovation professionals from large organizations who contributed to this survey. A year later, confusingly called the benchmark of 2020, they did the same survey again. And guess what? Many of the same obstacles are still there. So in a sense, little progress is being made in overcoming these obstacles. But they did also identify, specifically among a set of role model organizations, they identified as being leaders in the field, that there was a different prioritization of these obstacles. And also they identified a couple of things. Those organizations identified the need for more strategic approach to innovation, and also suggested that we should be getting away from some of the language which is typically used around innovation to do with failure, the need to fail more, fail faster, all that kind of thing. That stuff just doesn't make sense to the majority of people, and will never make sense to the majority of people in the mainstream. So we need to think a bit about what we're saying to people. Excuse me. So I'd like to highlight the importance of taking a more strategic approach to overcoming these obstacles and hopefully avoiding them in the first place by making this clear distinction between strategy and tactics. The innovation activities of most organizations are essentially tactical in nature, and they're sporadic in timing too. There's little or no strategic basis for what they're doing, to be honest. The difference between strategy and tactics is extremely important to understanding this situation and the opportunities in the field. You've probably heard the saying, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. It may or may not have been said by the Chinese warrior Sun Tzu, who also said things like, you can copy my tactics, but you can't copy my strategy, because you can't see it, to be honest. So what is your strategy? The strategy of your organization is your overall approach to achieving your purpose. You don't have multiple strategies for this, that, and the other. Your strategy is a singular thing, and of course you have a choice between alternative strategy. And there's a lot to be learned about the strategic aspects of innovation and the innovation aspects of strategy. There are a wide range of techniques used for working with ideas, and you're probably applying some of those yourself, generating ideas, developing ideas, selecting ideas, even implementing ideas. You might use agile or design thinking or any number of other techniques, but these are techniques, tactics, procedures, and so on to be employed for specific purposes. But on what basis? What ideas are you looking for? On what criteria will you be selecting them? In which context will they be implemented? There are some larger scale overall approaches, such as the Three Horizons approach for distinguishing different kinds of developments, which are more strategic in nature, but these tend to be based fairly precariously on predicted outcomes, which can be wrong, rather than anything more fundamental or substantial. So I know I'm being a bit provocative here, but I think we need to identify clearly what the strategic aspects of innovation are. Of course, you might also be using various systems and platforms for enabling or operating your innovation management operations. And these are almost essential these days, but they're not really providing a strategic basis. They require a strategic basis to perform effectively, in my humble opinion. So let's talk just broadly about strategy and innovation. This is a very crude diagram, but as your strategy describes your overall approach to achieving your purpose, it's an approach which takes into account the high level or fundamental aspects, depending on how you look at it, of the important areas of your operation. The approach relates to external and internal factors, including your purpose, your context, your circumstances. So how do we establish the innovation aspects of your organization's strategy? Well, they're essentially the same as the strategic aspects of the organization's innovation. So let's look at innovation in more detail and identify the aspects of it which are relevant to or contribute to the strategy of the organization. I would suggest there are 4 main strategic aspects of innovation. Firstly, it's important to develop a consensus about the role of innovation and its contribution to the achievement of the purpose of the organization. Without that, the rest is largely meaningless. Yet many organizations do not have any consensus, which gives rise to that lack of alignment, turf wars, and internal politics, which were identified in the innovation leader surveys as the major obstacle to innovation in large companies. Based on our understanding of how innovation happens, which is the second point here, in particular, the way in which innovations diffuse through populations and the different criteria applied by different people and organizations, these can be inverted to provide a coherent approach to the strategic aspects of innovation, which address at least 4 areas of innovation and alignment. Moving on, once we've understood the way in which innovations diffuse through organizations, through populations, the different categories of adopters, which we'll come on to talking about in a minute, we can also look at the disposition of the organization to innovation in those different areas. And everyone says, oh, we're all early adopters. No, you're not. You might be an early adopter in one aspect of your operations, but you're probably a laggard in a few others, and you're probably early majority or late majority in yet others. So it's important to understand which areas you're more risk averse in and which areas you're more gung-ho in, if you're going to understand how your organization's circumstances and approach relate to this model we have of how innovation happens. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through the next few slides, which are largely about what we do know about innovation and how it happens. You've probably seen curves like this. This harks back to Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations from the 1960s. And a lot of organizations are still not really applying this basic understanding of innovation to their activities. There are different categories of adopters, and we can see the yellow curve, which is a sort of a cumulative S-curve of adoption. Along came Geoffrey Moore, who talked about the chasm, who's saying it's not quite as simple as that, and there's a gap between the early adopters and the early majority. He also renamed all the categories as enthusiasts, visionaries, pragmatists, conservatives, and skeptics. And this chasm is an important distinction between the attitudes of the early adopters and those of the early majority. And in some sense, they're a complete flip of each other, complete inverse of each other, as I'll describe if you ever learn more from me about how to implement this stuff. We can identify, this is not really clearly done by either Everett Rogers or Geoffrey Moore, I don't think, but these are the different categories of adopters. And the way that I look at it is that the enthusiasts are motivated by futurism. So they basically say, one day everyone's going to be doing this. Can you prove it? No. The early adopters are motivated by advantages. As soon as those futurists start identifying that there are some realistic advantages which can be proven or identified, then they get interested. The fact that there is still a whole ton of disadvantages and obstacles to be overcome doesn't really concern them. They'll adopt it because there are advantages. And this is the situation. It's complicated. Organizational innovation is itself an innovation. So this is like a meta thing. And many organizations are in the early adopter category of organizational innovation itself. And we need to actually be looking at the next category, which is early majority, who are interested in benefits. And the benefits are the advantages net of the disadvantages after you've overcome the obstacles or disadvantages. And these are the pragmatists. If there are net benefits to be had, they want to be in. The late majority, or put it another way, categories in which you're in the late majority are ones where you don't really trust yourself to make a decision about anything. You know, you are motivated by popularity. You want to be in the same boat as everybody else, and your safety in numbers and all that stuff. And the laggards are a more complicated lot. They're actually motivated, I think, by longevity. They're not necessarily looking for old stuff. They don't want to change any more frequently than necessary. Anyway, this is an area to be delved into in more detail. Another way of looking at this model of how innovation happens, which underpins our strategic thinking, is the equivalent model, the old Gartner hype cycle, which you might have come across, described by Jackie Fenn and Mark Ruskino. This captures the main point that the diffusion of innovations is often not a monotonic process. It's not a hockey stick kind of one-way single slope upwards. Now, of course, this is not cumulative adoption. This is plotting something else. They're plotting visibility or hype. And this is more like the slope of the adoption curve, I think, but this is getting a bit technical. But the point is that there are two or maybe more upslopes, and not all innovations are going to make it across this trough of disillusionment. The trough is where people encounter the obstacles, the disadvantages, and it's only if those disadvantages are overcome and net benefits are obtained that we actually rise up this slope of enlightenment. So there are clearly two phases here, at least, and there might be more, of during which people get excited about the innovation. Firstly, when the advantages are encountered, and then secondly, when disadvantages are overcome and net benefits are encountered. And the problem we have is that because a lot of organizations and people think of innovation as being a monotonic curve, they confuse these two slopes with one another. So they think they're on the slope of enlightenment when they're still actually back here before the peak of inflated expectations. And so I say that they're suffering from premature enlightenment, which is a controversial term, but there we are. And as I said, organizational innovation, in other words, innovation management or the adoption of processes which can improve your innovation, is itself an innovation for a lot of organizations. So we need to be thinking about where we are on this curve as regards organizational innovation itself. While there are, of course, benefits from specific innovation which come to fruition, and that's the ultimate purpose, organizational innovation itself is developing to increase the effectiveness of those techniques. The techniques for identifying and selecting opportunities for innovation are becoming established in some organizations with processes in place to develop those innovations into valuable outcomes. But in most sectors, organizational innovation is still in the trough or yet to cross the chasm. And very little of this knowledge about innovation and how it happens is actually being applied in most organizations, either to their adoption of specific innovations or to the application of organizational innovation itself. And in my view, for organizational innovation to mature into the mainstream operational area, which it seems destined to become, there are a variety of obstacles to be overcome. And we can identify those obstacles in the surveys that Innovation Leader have described. And we can use this kind of models to start to understand how we distinguish between the advantages, the disadvantages, and the benefits of innovation itself. So I've probably overrun my time slightly, but in summary, I think that the future of strategic innovation involves thinking smarter, not just harder. It's not just about looking for more ideas and better ideas and so on. It's about thinking more clearly about what kind of ideas we're looking for. And I suspect that innovation doesn't actually begin with ideas at all. It begins further back with an understanding of what the purpose of innovation is in the achievement of the purpose of the organization. It involves developing a consensus about innovation throughout the organization, and I can help you do that. Its role in achieving its purpose and how it happens. It's about shifting established organizations from the visionary approach to organizational innovation to a more pragmatic early majority attitude. And this also involves changing the language that we use around innovation and getting away from all this nonsense about failure. So in general, this requires being more realistic about the strengths and weaknesses of your organization and its disposition to innovation and how to apply some of this knowledge to perform more effectively. Thank you. This is me, and here's some contact information, which I hope you'll see on the recording, or you can jot down now to contact me after the discussion.